Programs and Exhibitions Officer here at the museum, and I am standing in today for Mary Pat Higgins, our CEO. She was called away on a family emergency. Deep breath, it's okay, but sometimes when your family calls, you have to go. So it is my pleasure to be here with you today at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum, and I'm very happy to welcome you all here. For the first time, we are hosting this event here in our new space. We gather today to commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. On January 27, 1945, Soviet troops liberated Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest of the 6 Nazi death camps. Between 1942 and 1944, over 1 million people were murdered there, and the vast majority of them were Jews. In 2005, the United Nations designated January 27th as a Remembrance Day to honor all victims of the Holocaust. Upon issuing the resolution, the UN urged member states to develop educational programs to instill the memory of this tragedy in future generations to prevent genocide from occurring again. Unfortunately, genocides are still occurring as we speak. 2020 marks the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, as I said, and numerous other camps. It also marks the end of World War II. 75 years is a long time, and the Holocaust often feels very far away from this time and this place. But this museum, which is a dream 40 years in the making for so many of our local survivors, stands as a testament that we will always remember the victims of the Holocaust, who lost their lives to anti-Semitism and to blind hatred and senseless prejudice. And we will honor our survivors who remind us every day of the best of humanity. Our mission, to teach the history of the Holocaust and advance human rights to combat prejudice, hatred, and indifference, is realized in this space as we welcome visitors to learn the history of the Holocaust and human and civil rights in our own country and challenge them to be upstanders in our communities. It is realized every time a student hears the first-hand testimony of a Holocaust survivor. It is realized through our programming for the community and through our workshops for teachers and professionals. And it is realized on days like today, when we gather to remember the past, acknowledge the present, and look to the future with hope. We all know that anti-Semitism is on the rise in this country and around the world. From acts of violence to cruel and thoughtless words, we have seen it all around us. But as I look out into this room, I know we have the tools to combat anti-Semitism and hatred, and to help each other understand that our strength lies in our very differences and diversity. I hope you will all join me as we work to create a community of upstanders. I'd like to recognize a very important group of people in our community here today, our survivors. These men and women are the heart and soul of this museum and its mission. They are the reason we are able to open the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. They not only educate us, but they also remind us of the remarkable power of human resilience and the human spirit. While we cannot imagine what they went through, we can do our best to celebrate and honor them, and I appreciate all of you being here to help us do that today. Now, I would like to acknowledge the survivors we have with us today. I won't ask them to stand, but I will ask them to hold up their hands as I call their names. Jeanette Albert, Helen Biederman, Rosa Blum, Tova Feldman, Irma Freudenreich. Hi, Irma. Maggie First, Max Glauben, Tibor Grunberger, Herschel Prengler, Heinz Wallach, hi Heinz, Elizabeth Wolf, Helmut Wolf, and last but certainly not least, Roseanne Zerner. Thank you all for being here and for being such an incredibly important part of the museum and our mission. You really renew our hope in humanity each and every day that we have the distinct pleasure and honor to work with you. I'd like to also extend a special thanks to Rabbi Ari Sunshine of Congregation Sherebeth Israel and Reverend Chris Girata of St. Michael and All Angels for being with us. Today, regardless of faith, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of background, we come together as one to remember the victims of the Holocaust. So with that, I would ask that you please help me welcome Rabbi Sunshine to the stage.
Amen.
Thank you, Sarah. Friends, in this week's scriptural reading in the Jewish community, we learn about the last 3 plagues that God brings to bear upon the Egyptians: locusts, darkness, and the slaying of the firstborn. At first glance, given that there's a sense of the plagues escalating from most mild to most severe, one of these 3 plagues really seems out of place, and that's darkness. How could darkness possibly be the penultimate plague? It's true that the Torah notes that the darkness was so thick it could be touched, that it lasted for 3 days, and that none of the Egyptians could get up from where they were. But still, is darkness really that devastating a plague? One factor which points to the power of this plague is the message it would have sent to the Egyptians, whose supreme god was the sun god Ra. Their chief god would have been exposed as powerless by the descent of the country into total darkness for 3 days. But in addition to that explanation of the plague's power from the ancient Near Eastern context, our rabbinic sages offered a number of other rationales for why darkness would be so terrible. One rabbinic legend calls the plague of darkness the darkness of Gehinnom, and connects the darkness that afflicted Egypt with the primordial darkness that existed before God said, "Let there be light." That darkness, says this teaching, is a foretaste of the punishment that lies in store for those who cannot truly see their neighbors for the human beings they are, who cannot feel each other's pain, nor recognize the dignity of their afflicted neighbors. Sadly, we know all too well that Pharaoh and the Egyptians were not the only people in history who lived under a veil of darkness, who could not see their Israelite neighbors as human beings or recognize their dignity. Time and again throughout the ages, the Jewish people and other minorities have been marginalized, oppressed, scapegoated, attacked, and killed by those who saw them as different and other. The Shoah, the Holocaust, which we remember all too painfully today, tomorrow on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and every day, testifies starkly to the presence of darkness in our world still today. And that darkness of anti-Semitism continues to weigh heavily on our minds. We're concerned because of October 27th, 2018, a Shabbat morning in Pittsburgh, which could have been a Shabbat of shalom, of peace, a Shabbat of joy, and Shabbat of community, like every Shabbat before that one, and every Shabbat we yet hope to celebrate in the future. But instead was a Shabbat that bore witness to the murder of 11 Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Squirrel Hill as the killer shouted, "All Jews must die." We're concerned because 6 months later on Shabbat morning, April 27th, the last day of Pesach, the last day of Passover, another shooter visited death on another synagogue, this time a Chabad center in Poway, California, having posted online just beforehand an open letter in the form of an anti-Semitic rant blaming Jews for the meticulously planned genocide of the European race. And just last month, we witnessed more brazen attacks, including a murderous assault on a kosher supermarket in Jersey City, New Jersey, and a stabbing attack at a rabbi's home in Muncie, New York, on the 7th night of Hanukkah. How do we respond to this darkness? First of all, we must continue to vow lo tishkach, do not ever forget. Never think that there won't be another Pharaoh or biblical people of Amalek or Haman or Hitler. As long as blood still fills our veins and air still fills our lungs, we have a sacred duty to build a world in which it is impossible for hatred to survive. But this vow of lo tishkach isn't only about never forgetting those who are filled with anger and hatred against us. It's also about pledging to never forget those victims who were murdered, defamed, persecuted, and tortured. It's about telling their stories and devoting our lives to theirs, lifting up not only their mourning families and communities, but also the values that animated them. If you were to take a visit to Pittsburgh today and visit the Tree of Life Dor Chadash congregation, you'd see, first of all, the chain-link fence that surrounds the building. And then if you'd hang around, you'd also notice that the only person who goes in and out of that dark building is the custodian, who maintains the synagogue until its leaders decide what to do with it. Because one thing is certain, they can't see themselves ever praying there again without experiencing violent flashbacks to that terrible October Shabbat morning in 2018 when 11 members of their community were shot and killed. For now, the building remains as a reminder, as a sacred memorial, lest we ever forget. For if you look through the fence at the synagogue's front door, you'll see an Israeli flag, you'll see a note thanking first responders, you'll see a list of the 11 victims' names in Jewish stars, and a promise: no day shall erase you from the memory of time. This morning, in our adult bar mitzvah class at Shereth Israel, we happen to be talking about Passover. I guess it's never too early for that. And we were discussing the central theme of the Passover Seder, of recalling our having been treated like unwanted strangers and so much worse in Egypt, only to be redeemed from this slavery and oppression by God. We tell the Passover story, and for a similar reason, survivors of the Shoah testify to what they endured and who they lost, in the hopes that we can change the way people think and act and get people to stop fearing and hating difference. We must educate unceasingly and build bridges always. If we can live up to this sacred mandate, not just lo tishkach, don't forget, not just to zachor, to remember the senseless devastation of the Shoah, but to translate this memory into action together, then one day at a time, one community at a time, we can and will eradicate hatred. In the words of our Passover Haggadah, God took us from slavery to freedom, from sorrow to joy, from mourning to festivity, and from thick darkness to a great light. May we continue to be vigilant in doing our part to help our world move from darkness to light, paving the way for the future redeemed world, a world of understanding, a world of acceptance, a world of love that we all hope and dream for. Kain Hi Ratzon, with our strength and resolve and God's help, may it soon be so. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Sunshine. I'd now like to invite Reverend Girada up to the podium.
It's an honor for me to be here today to be a part of this remembrance service. And as I was thinking about remarks I could make, it took me back to middle school with a history teacher of mine who loved to tell history through stories. Stories are what got me interested in history, and stories is what I think we are remembering here today. Stories, beyond just the details and the specifics, are what enlighten and inspire people not only to learn information, but to gain knowledge from that information. And perhaps that kind of storytelling, that historic storytelling, is what we are missing most often today. I think think about my children, I think about children I see at my church, and one of the things that I don't see as much of is historic storytelling, where we're able to tell the stories of the past and then to gain knowledge from those stories in order to not repeat our mistakes. Tomorrow is the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and I think, as Rabbi Sunshine mentioned, we are seeing a resurgence of hate in a way that is very scary. Around the world, attacks on people who are directed at separate groups using language to dehumanize the other has risen. Things that were once considered taboo to say are now being spoken by world leaders in many different countries. And as much as we can be dismayed at that kind of rhetoric, I think that for me, I understand that hate comes slowly and in many different forms. And perhaps the most pernicious of all are those very small moments, those subtle moments, where we seemingly harmless cruelties are shared between people, those little injustices that happen every day. I remember reading a study at one point about Harvard law students. One study showed that a survey of incoming Harvard law students said that over 80% of them hoped to practice nonprofit law upon graduation. And when they graduated, less than 5% did. And the study went on to interview these students who had seeming to have this massive shift in just a few years. And what they discovered is that the students had all but forgotten what it was they had intended to do when they started that program. They had, in the words of the author, forgot themselves on purpose. I think that's a really interesting idea for us, because we are all susceptible to these small little nudges, these moments that can move us away from our core, from our center, from the person that we really hope to be. And it doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't even happen quickly. It happens slowly, with one subtle action at a time. No matter our age, we are all very susceptible to influences that lead us either closer to one another or separate us and lead us farther apart. 9 months ago, I had the privilege of visiting Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, and what I thought about that display was that they showed the story of what brought us here today, this remembrance of the Holocaust. And the story that Yad Vashem tells is that small little decisions were made by people over time. Little decisions that could maybe be defended in their little small micro moments, but as you connect the dots over years and years, people who would have otherwise been good people, wanting to do good and to treat people well, had been formed and reformed and transformed into people that would allow amazing inhumanity to occur. People who may have even defended the horrors that we remember today. That, unfortunately, can happen again. I think that we live in a world in which small little inhumanities, small little cruelties are becoming far too commonplace. And you and I can do something about this. If you are here today, you care enough to make a difference. If you are here today, you care enough to stand up for what is right. If you are here today, you care enough and you have the capacity to begin to change the world around you for the better. No person in this room is without capacity. No person in this room is without the strength to influence those around you to do something better, to be better, to defend those who need defending, to defend those who feel outcast. Today, I hope our memorial service, I hope this remembrance is not just a look to the past, but it is a very direct look forward. Because what we remember today should not be repeated, and unfortunately, could be. May each one of us own our power, own our strength, own our authority to be the kind of influence in the world toward human unity and not away from it, so that we can make sure this never again happens.
As you all came in today, you were provided electric votives. As Rabbi Sunshine and Reverend Rana begin lighting the candles, we invite you to light your own as we take a moment of remembrance.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we remember before you this day those killed during the Holocaust, for the innocents murdered, for those who wrongly used your name to kill, and for those who did not speak up against such injustice. Guide us in our efforts to root out intolerance, to root out prejudice in our world, that we may see greater understanding between faiths, that we may not make peace with oppression, and that we will remove our blindness and bitterness of heart. Grant us grace to be faithful to God's holy covenant and to grow in love. We pray all of this in God's holy name. Amen.
Amen.
And we join together in reciting the words of the mourners' Kaddish. Yit
Gadal v'yit kadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divra k'motei v'yamlich malchutei,
v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei t'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'lomei hamayah. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitraleh v'yitalal shmei t'kisha brichu. Le'elam mikol mirchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom v'noach, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Amen. May God, who makes peace in the heavens, bestow peace and kindness and love upon all Israel and all the people of our earth. And let us say,
Amen.
I would like to thank you all for being with us here today, and we hope that you'll join us in our lobby for some hot cider and some cookies, which has become our tradition here. And please feel free to take your votives home with you today. Thank you so much.
So with honor, reverence, good words. Bye, sweetie.
Bye.
Lovely to see you.
You as well. Thank you for the nice job that you guys do here. Absolutely.
She's a good girl.
Sorry, so she's how's that?
Yes.